fourth session of the conference and second session of the day entitled International Best Practices, Latest Technologies of a Green Economy, and it will be chaired by Ms. Engineer Martiza Bagas. She's an international sustainability and environmental consultant with mechanical engineering background in the multinational oil and gases and mining industries, energy and carbon management, GHG emissions inventories, IPCC protocol. She is also an environmental impact assessment, environmental management and legislation, environmental auditing, water management, water waste treatment, economic cost benefits analysis, environmental training, environmental legislations, environmental compliance, environmental management systems, GRI, global reporting initiatives, and sustainability reports, social investment valuation. Without further ado, let me invite her to start the session.
Sorry. This session is very important because it's in line with the Saudi Vision 2030, and because Saudi Arabia is also part of the G20, and being so, they are committed to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. These are the most relevant goals for Saudi Arabia now are 6. And in this conference, we're going to be talking about 3 of them. First one is resilient cities. The first presentation is about green economy to help cities to be more livable and resilient. The second presentation will be about the journey of the Royal Commission, which has been an excellent input in economic growth for the country. And the third presentation will be about energy, affordable energy, renewables, photovoltaic in Saudi Arabia. So let's start with the first presentation. Will be Mr. Fasil Abdul Rahiman. He's an energy, climate change, and sustainability professional with over 12 years of experience. He's the manager of EY in the MENA region, Climate Change and Sustainability Services team. He has worked closely with the region government, cities, and corporates, and setting up energy strategies, green economy frameworks, and climate change resilient plans. Please, go ahead.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction. Good morning. Assalamu alaikum. First of all, thanks for the organizers for inviting EY to this event. Nice city, nice climate, and yeah, I think some exciting topics. I think that last session was very interactive, so good to see the audience interaction. Yeah, I think it took some time for me to adjust the topic within that box. It's a large topic, but in a sense, I'll be sort of briefing you why the context of green economy towards making cities more resilient, to keep it in simple words. Now, to start off with, a lot of stats in the slide, but why exactly the cities? That's the whole context, actually. So the cities, if you look at in terms of the areas of the cities, the coverage is not much globally, but within that short area, you have lots of people in there and a significant amount of contribution to the GDP. So if you're about to change the world, if you're going for a Pareto analysis, if you're targeting where most people are and where most of the GDP is concentrated, it's very important we look at the cities where most of the people and where most of the business is actually happening. So if you look at the top, the 300 largest cities in the world, it only comes around 19% of the population, but in terms of GDP, it contributes nearly half of the global GDP. you can see some of the cities with respect to Hong Kong, China, Japan, and Brazil. If you look at the population, they're much larger than about 150 countries put together. So, which shows actually how big the context of the cities are. And you can actually see the graph on the right. In the 1950s, close to 67% of the population was rural and only 1/3 in the cities. But now it's 2008, it was sort of 50-50. Now the numbers the cities have taken over compared to the rural population. And what you can expect in 2050 is a reversal of 1950. And most of that growth is going to happen in the developing countries, especially in Asia and Africa. So it's a huge area of focus. Even if you look from a financial point of view, the finance required for that investments is massive. It's around 60 to 70 trillion. And just around 500 million of residents in those cities will be driving 55% of the global GDP, and of course 60% of the growth. And you can see the last statistics. You can see gradually over the years, the bigger cities are tending to be more towards Asia, in line with the graph which I mentioned. So that's where all the cities are going to play. So it's very important we look from a city point of view to make sure how the cities are driving the sustainability agenda or the green economy agenda going forward. Now, what is a green economy? Right, so we talk a lot about green economy. There are varying kinds of definitions for green economy. And end of the day, it's a macroeconomic approach. So traditionally, all looked from an economic point of view. The focus on sustainability or sort of a resource efficiency was not that much. But the green economy is a concept wherein it's not just about finance, but you make sure your resources are used efficiently so that it is saved for the future generations. Now, green economy is one aspect which cities are taking forward as a central solution for most of their problems. Because going forward, resource scarcity is a problem. So to address that problem, green economy is very vital. Now, what constitute green economy traits? If you can see in the circle, traditionally all the cities or the approach of the cities all focus on the quality. They were very concerned for the quality of the people. Efficiency was very key, especially from a financial point of view. And of course, all the cities also tended to be competitive. But the three main aspects sort of emerging and which sort of distinguish green economy for cities is, one is resilience, because risk is emerging as a very big topic. It's a very disruptive world with lots of mega trends around. So it's very important risk is taken into account. Second is, of course, sustainability. The city owners are more concerned, okay, how sustainable the cities are, so that they make sure there is enough resources going forward from a long-term planning point of view. Last but not the least is connection. So there are lots of stakeholders within a city framework, but because of the extent of technology and because of the importance of collaboration, there's a more focus on connecting all of those stakeholders. So that sort of is a difference between a traditional approach and a green economy approach. Now, why is green economy is important? Of course, people use the word interchangeably. Green economy, which is sort of focusing on sustainability. There is also huge emphasis on ESG. When I say ESG, it's environmental, social, and governance aspects. As I mentioned, financial aspects were always looked at, but over the last few years and going forward, people are more and more looking at the ESG aspects. Why? Because financial decisions was largely centered around the financial aspects, of course. If someone is investing in an asset, they primarily look, okay, how much money they're getting out of it. But there is a more and more growing need for the investors to make sure what they're investing in any asset or in any organization or in any city is also contributing in terms of values and in an ethical manner. So that's why the focus on environment, social, and governance is getting much more focused these days. Now, the graph which you see on the right is the global risk landscape. It is an annual sort of exercise conducted by the World Economic Forum. They have been doing it for the past many years. But what you can actually see in terms of the impact and likelihood of the risks, what is there in the upper quadrant, it's more or less coming towards the green economy or the ESG topics. So clearly you can see extreme weather events, failure of climate change mitigation and adaptation, water crisis, things around man-made environmental disasters. And the trend over the last 5 to 6 years especially has been that environmental, social and governance topic is of a big concern. And the key stakeholders and decision makers acknowledge that it's one of the major risks, top priority risk globally for any country or a city or any organization. So that is one of the reasons why green economy and ESG is getting a significant importance these days. I mean, you might see in the newspapers within the ESG topics, of course, there are lots of topics, but climate change, for example, is getting more and more prominence. You see over the last few years in the newspaper, some of the leading entities being in the news for various reasons, mainly with respect to their commitments on the climate change or how much ready they are on the climate change. So some of the clips you can actually see, climate change is also emerging sort of as a financial risk. So definitely it's getting high on the radar. And climate change, in fact, I mean, even you can see more and more examples in the region. We are having sort of non-periodic floods. The rain effects at times are a bit destructive. And of course, within the region, there are lots of focus on the coastal areas. So we are depending a lot on the seawater temperature, which is affecting a lot on the operations. The increase in temperature is affecting the efficiency of the operation. So climate change now clearly has a risk in terms of the financial point of view. And it's not just the financial point of view, but of course, investors, as I mentioned, is looking at, okay, when they're going to invest in an asset, they want to know how climate change is going to impact your business in terms of cost and what actions you're going to take towards it. We all know the Paris Agreement and the subsequent COPs are always putting a more emphasis on the climate change impact. So traditionally, the focus was more on climate change mitigation, whereas we try to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. But people acknowledge there is a limit in terms of making sure the greenhouse gas emission can be reduced to a desired level. So they see the effects of climate change happening. So they're going more also towards climate change adaptation. So if a climate change risk is happening, how we are going to adapt to each of those risks. So that is emerging as more and more focus area. In fact, FSB, the Financial Stability Board, has even come up with a framework how you can report the risk related to climate change and the financial impacts. So they have come up with a clear framework on how a company and the governments can actually report the impact of the climate change. How, from a transitional point of view or the physical risk point of view, it can be incorporated into the balance sheet and go into the financial statements. Now, what can the cities do with respect to each of those aspects? I mean, when you say green economy, I mean, how do you make it a green economy? So definitely sustainability is the way forward. Again, it's a broad word, but what does that mean? Cities need to incorporate the sustainability aspects. You saw in the previous presentation, you saw in the examples yesterday, there are various dimensions to be integrated into the approach of the planning of the cities. Right? And why and what are the benefits of it? Of course, you get a better relationship with your stakeholders. So the more and more you're showing the commitments towards the green economy and sustainability, you can clearly demonstrate that ethical value to your stakeholders. Second, especially for the companies, you have a sort of a market differentiation because in some cases you might be competing and on the same page in terms of the financial metrics or the outputs, but if you're focusing a bit more on the ESG side, definitely that is a market driver or a market differentiator. Enhanced efficiency is a no-brainer because end of the day, it's all about improving the resource efficiency. So the more you focus on the green economy, the less number of resources you will be actually putting in, especially over a longer term, especially when you take into account of the circular economy, the long-term impact assessment, and so on. And last but not the least is the more you focus on the green economy and sustainability, there is a process of innovation which is happening because you're trying to make it more resource efficient. So what is happening in the process is people is thinking out of the box and they're coming up with innovative solutions. be it in the technology side, be it in the energy side, be it in the value chain, be it in the waste side, be it in the product side. So that is something which is also sort of a byproduct or a potential value of having an integrated sustainability strategy in effect. Now, in terms of integrating sustainability, there's no one single right answer. Okay, how if you want to integrate sustainability, you're starting the journey. There are different ways to look at it, but of course there are a few key elements. So, citing the UN Global Compact sort of framework, the level of integration is basically broken down into 5 areas. So the first aspect, as you know, is of course you need to make sure your business should manage the crisis. So that should be one of the most important priority. That should be sort of the basic priority you need to make sure, because unless and until you can manage the crisis and the risks, the business or the cities are not longer going to survive. So that is very important. Second is, of course, there are compliance aspects to be covered. It could be from a local aspect, it could be from a country aspect, it could be at the city level aspect. Of course, it could be in terms of international commitments. So that is definitely a must. Then you come into a stage of resource optimization, because once you get the risks controls in place and then you make sure the compliance are tick boxed, then you need to focus on resource optimization. And once you make sure, okay, you're efficient from a resource point of view, then there is a need to show growth, which means you need to get sort of a market differentiation with respect to your peers. And last but not the least, you should always make sure there's a purpose driven in terms of your long-term goals. So when a city is setting some vision, ambitions and targets, there needs to be a definite purpose around the green economy. Although you see it as like 5 different steps, doesn't mean these are like completely distinct steps, because of course there are lots of overlaps. Because if you just keep the purpose driven at the last, doesn't mean, okay, you focus on all other things and the purpose comes only at the last, but at least there is a 5 different building blocks, which is definitely needed by the cities in order to make sure the sustainability is well integrated. We talked about the connected box in the green economy traits. Now, why the aspect of connectivity is important? Because ecosystem comprises of a large number of stakeholders, be it in terms of sectors, be it in terms of the people. So, if you want to get the complete fruit out of it, you need to make sure all the stakeholders are actually involved and connected. You need to make sure all the opinions from a customer point of view, not just from the government point of view or the business point of view, but even from the customer point of view. So all the parts of the value chain should be heard. And one better way to do it is actually you're connecting the dots through the help of technology, which is turning more and more vital in terms of accelerating the pace of green economy. I mean, of course, the session title is all about the international best practices. It's tough to pinpoint, okay, what is the best practice as such. So there are a lot of practices by different cities. Doesn't mean one is better than other in all the aspects. But there are several aspects, whereas some cities are standing out, maybe in other aspects they're down. But of course, as you can see across some of the cities, as you see in the Cape Town, they're focusing on the water resilience because water is an issue. Some of them, for example, Pittsburgh is focusing resiliency strategy more from an investment point of view. So to make sure the investors see a clear resilient strategy. Berkeley, as an example, and then one of the sections is specifically on the energy. The focus is more on having a resilient energy system. Waste to energy in the Chile is another example, looking at more from a circular economy point of view, at least from the targets and the vision they have set in the place. So there are lots of best practices the cities are embracing. And it's always easy to talk, okay, about green economy, but I think the fundamental thing for any investors at the end of the day is actually, okay, where do we get the finance from? Right? So there are 2 ways actually to look at the finance. One is you can go with the traditional approaches, because if you look at the box on the left, there are lots of existing asset management practices which can be actually tapped in to make sure, okay, you further improve the efficiency of the assets. Green finance is not something very far off. Of course, you in the region you see lots of green finance towards energy. You even see towards the building sector on the energy efficiency, on the ESCO market, as you see on the Tarshi, the example here. Private sector capital is another way to tap the potential. There is also growing importance of public-private partnerships. And of course, there's tourism and digital markets are also growing, wherein you can tap the finance. But apart from that, what you see on the right are some of the emerging topics. So one is the recycling capital. You see a lot of emphasis on the circular economy in the conference. So if you actually assess the potential of the circular economy over a longer period of time, it definitely gets into money savings, which not many are actually realizing. I think it's also very important there is a proper measuring and reporting performance in place, because people talk a lot about success, but not necessarily it is measured in a right way across all the angles: financial, environmental, social, and governance angles. So that is something very important going forward. And last but not the least, I think in the last panel we touched about the importance of the legislation and regulations. So that is also one way wherein you can drive some financial impetus into the market. I think to conclude, what we need to deliver the successful green cities are the following, in my opinion. Of course, you need to have an inspiring vision. At the top, the government needs to take a bold step and tell, okay, this is our vision, and we are focusing on green economy strategy and frameworks, because that is a very important step to take forward, which further drives all the stakeholders. Second is, when you talk about green economy, it's very important you demonstrate, okay, what is the business case out of it from a financial point of view. Because unless you bring in that financial element to the green economy, then not necessarily you're going in the right direction with your investment decisions. Third, as we mentioned, funding mechanism is very important. Fourth is you need to have solid examples of projects and their successful performance metrics reported. Fifth, risk, we don't need to talk about it anymore. Managing risk is very important going forward because of the disruptions. But last but not the least is we need to make sure all the stakeholders are coming together in the city. So unless all the stakeholders are touched upon and their values or opinions are not heard, we won't be reaching a goal of a successful green economy city, which is a resilient one. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fasil, for your interesting presentation about green cities. And I think one very interesting point was to talk about the integration and financing of when we are building our green cities. Now, we have to keep in mind that green cities are not only good for the environment, but also financially. So we go to the second presentation from Dr. Alexander Jovcik. He has more than 20 years of experience across wastewater treatment, waste and environmental management, logistics and best practice, health and safety. He has worked in oil and gas, dairy, and government sectors across Australasia and Middle East. He's a strategic leader of operations and teams with a focus on developing and optimizing processes to reduce costs and to increase capacity. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction. Your Excellencies, honored guests, esteemed colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. And this is the extent of my Arabic, which is even a bit more pitiful than what Peter had earlier in the first session. I'm going to talk about RC and the development, the journey of RC for the last 44 years. But I'm also going to talk a little bit about my own journey for the last 9 months. I heard the first time of Yambu in about 2010 when a Shell colleague of mine was here to do an audit on one of their facilities here. I had never heard of it before, and until the recruiter knocked on my door, I haven't heard of it since. Inshallah, that my voice will last for the next 20 minutes, so please bear with me. I hope you can hear me in the back. I need to give you a little bit of background about myself. I was born and bred in the Rhine-Ruhr area in Germany. This is predominantly coal, steel, heavy manufacturing, chemical industries. I lived and worked in Pittsburgh in the USA. This is very much steel industries. There are also food industries. I was an environmental regulator in Geelong and Victoria, just an hour out of Melbourne. Heavy industries, aluminium plants, etc. And I worked in Ras Laffan in Qatar, which is also a oil and gas site. I will talk about this more in a minute, and you will understand where the relation comes in. I'm going to talk through the RC role, the Apcd role, and I give a couple of examples of green economy. RCY and RC Jubail and Jambu have been very much blessed with leaders with foresight. And for the last 44 years, there has been heavy investment to set these industrial cities up. I don't want to go into much detail, just have a look. In the beginning, there was open space. As all of you that have visited now and have gone through the city, you can see that this is a bustling industrial city, a green city, which is quite remarkable in a very dry country that Saudi Arabia is. Similarly, these are the beginnings. From the 1970s to now, this is the head office area. And the journey is not over yet. So you can see this is the area, and some of our guests would have stayed in the Mövenpick that is close by. These are the areas, and this is further development that will be happening in the coming years. Now, what you see here in the green is the community area. In the orange is the existing industrial area with 150 industries. In the light yellow, and my wife always tells me I'm colorblind, so this is also green, is the expansion area. So we're going from 150 square kilometers to 600 square kilometers. This is massive. As I told you before, I've been around the world, I've seen industrial centers, but this is an industrial city that came out of nowhere and has gone from empty spaces to 600 square kilometers of high-performing industries. Now, why did I bring up where I lived before? Because if you have an organically grown city, quite often you have legacies. So in Germany, because the industries have developed over hundreds of years and the environmental practices were quite different in the past, this is something very different here in RC Jambu, because these are planned cities, and right from the start they allowed for waste management. Right in the start they looked at what would be an impact on environment, what would be the impact on the corals in the Red Sea, etc. So this is a very different scenario. If you look at the map here at the very far south or at the very far right of the map, there is a beach called White Sands Beach. I will talk about that a bit later. Just keep that in mind during for the presentation, please. These are just some statistics that show how much Jambu will be growing in the coming years. I don't want to go through every single one of them. It's just an impression to give you a flavor. The Royal Commission and the function and the mission is stated here very clearly. The Royal Commission Jambu, Royal Commission Jubail and Jambu, an internationally recognized industrial business hub with a vast growing high-skill economy in a sustainable community with a high quality of life. Now that's a mission. That is something to aspire to. The mission is also to provide services whatever a city needs. Now the best way I can describe the Royal Commission function is if you imagine a city with its bylaws plus a state. So if you look at the US, if you look at Germany, if you look at Australia, the RC is a combination of a city plus a state. Because normally in a city you wouldn't have an environmental regulator. You might have a health inspector, but you would not have an Apcd department. You would not necessarily have a commission for investment or other things. This is what Royal Commission Yambu is providing. The DGTA already alluded that we have been successful in gaining the ISO 37120 Platinum accreditation early November this year. This puts us internationally into context with world-renowned cities. I understand from some of my colleagues that ISO accreditation in Saudi Arabia sometimes is not highly regarded. But this is very special. 37120 uses 100 criteria based on the UN sustainability goals to standardize how you measure different functions in each city. This allows a direct comparison between the performance of each cities. Very interesting, the director and I were in Dubai and received the certification and on behalf of RC. And what they told us there was there's a major investment program going on for the government of Canada. And in Canada, 15 cities are considered to be invested in. But unless they get this accreditation, and then the government can make decisions clearly whether they need additional schools, additional bridges, hospitals or whatnot, they will not invest the money. So this is a very fantastic thing to have, and we are only the third city in Saudi that has achieved this. The EPCD. EPCD is the Environmental Protection and Control Department. The EPCD is now a fully integrated team, meaning we have RC staff, we have Parson staff, we have a contractor staff, all working together. And the guys are high performing, right from the director down to the T-boy. Now I can't say that too loud because some of them are in the room and end of year performances are coming up, so I made to make sure that the head doesn't get too big. Anyway, the sections that we have got in the EPCD are the permitting section, permitting enforcement, monitoring, which is broken down into air quality, water quality, waste management and marine, and the planning and awareness. Now, permitting speaks for itself. We issue permits to the industries, we control them, and if we have to, we enforce. Monitoring also speaks for itself. The planning and awareness is our link to the community to demonstrate what the environment is like and to give the information out that is based on scientific findings that we have had as our team. So we can avoid misinformation and we can all clearly demonstrate also where we need to focus on. Our work is based on the policies and the Royal Commission environmental regulations. A number of things that we have introduced, newly introduced to RCY. Polluter pays principle. Win-win-win. I sometimes get eyebrows raised when I mention that. RC Yambu is an industrial city. If our industrial partners don't make a profit, there's no reason for us to be here. So there needs to be a win for them. At the same time, they also need to invest in the community, and they need to ensure that their processes and procedures are sustainable, that we can give something to the future communities, and this is an ongoing city and an ongoing enterprise. We have introduced the EPCD Industrial Focal Pointship. This pairs two of our team with the different industries. So the industries have contact partners that they can talk to directly, and then if these need to talk to different specialists in different areas, they do so. This allows us to build relationships with the industries and to have a stronger The World Commission on Environmental Regulations are reviewed every 5 years. 2020, we are now in the 2015 regulations, and we're just working on the 2020. EPCD here in Jambu started the review during Ramadan, and we involved our colleagues in Jazan, and we came up with a traffic light system for discussion internally. And the traffic light system was green, low impact on the industries. Just a change of words, no major impact. Yellow, operational impact on industries. Red was really up for discussion with our colleagues from Jubail in the headquarters, because they were a little bit more out there. Are we ready for that yet or not? This has set us up to have our discussions that are still ongoing with RC Jubail and the headquarters. We are also reviewing and improving our incident investigation procedure, because we want to make sure, although we talk about win-win, and although we talk about relationship with the industries, sometimes things do go wrong. And we need to be in a position to discuss that with the industries, and if need be, also to issue penalties. But penalties don't come first. Penalties only come as a last resort. Now talking about air and air quality. We've got 6 air quality monitoring stations currently. We're doing a weekly air quality index, which we publish internally, and it is one of the goals that we have, to also make that available to the wider community. We're working with industries, and we have a number of initiatives to improve the air quality. In the coming months, we're going to install another 3 air quality monitoring stations, and we have more online data integration. One of the big steps is the change from heavy fuel oil to gas. This will make the air quality in Jambu even better than it has been. These are some of the examples, and I'll just let you have a quick read. I don't want to go through in detail for every single one. On the water side, the RC policy is quite clear. There should be no discharge of treated wastewater to the Red Sea. At this stage, we're not quite achieving this. But okay, this is a good challenge to have. That is something that we can work on, that we can aspire, that we can make better. We're aiming for 100% reuse. Whether this is going to be now, let me flip back again. Having lived in New Zealand and Australia, sometimes with very resource-constrained, water-constrained environments, water is at a premium price there, and is quite often used for farming, for other things. So one of the projects that we've got in the moment is to look particularly at the water reuse, and how we can have a beneficial reuse, potentially farming for non-food products, because you don't want to go into that cycle from industrial wastewater. Currently, 100% of the sewage, of the sanitary wastewater, is being recycled, but we have a gap on the industrial wastewater. Waste management. In waste management, currently we are achieving 45% of recycle. That means we meet the national standard for 2019. The national standard is being raised to 54% next year. So we've got challenges ahead of us to achieve that. Again, the team and I are welcoming the changes, because it actually makes us work harder and find good solutions. It would be boring if you would be doing all the same all the time, again and again. Currently, we have 3 waste treatment facilities. We have some issues with that. Some of the data we're still handling quite manually. We're intending to improve that, both for the recycling and to move the data management much more electronically and online. Now, RC Yambu is quite special too, because here we have 3 separate areas with mangrove forests. Now, mangrove forests are internationally recognized as havens for fish stock, for fish breeding, but also for coastal protection. These have been replanted, 2 million mangrove seedlings in different species by volunteers. This is something to be really proud of. Our marine team is also looking at a number of different areas: seawater quality, coral reef studies, etc. Oil spill response in particular. You would have seen that if you had a look at the exhibition. Personally, I mentioned White Sands Beach to you beforehand. A number of colleagues and I go on a regular basis to White Sands Beach to snorkel there. And it is a fantastic environment, and I can really not describe it. The pictures don't do it justice. Personally, I've seen eagle rays, sea turtles, a variety of fish, snorkeling only. You go into other environments. I lived in Malaysia, I lived in Australia. You have to go scuba diving to even have the opportunities to see something like that. So it's a really rich environment here, and it is being protected. One of the investigations that we want to have a look at is, could we possibly make this into a marine sanctuary? Now, this comes from the idea, if you look at army training places overseas, no one is allowed to go into these, and the environment really flourishes. This is a protected industrial area. No one is allowed to go into. The Coast Guard is protecting it. So we have a real opportunity. Whether we can actually achieve it or not, but we at least have to give it a go. White Sands Beach is also one more thing that I would like to mention. This weekend, Parsons, in conjunction with RC Security and the Coast Guard, did a beach cleanup. We cleaned 1 kilometer of beach stretch and removed about 1 ton of plastic waste, just by volunteers. It looks fantastic. It is an industrial city, and we have a lot of projects going on to increase recycling, have more waste management and other things here. Is this a perfect example of circular economy? No. But it is showing that we are making inroads to get this way, and it's not always easy. Ladies and gentlemen, please just give me one more, just one more. As an industrial city, Royal Commission Yambu might not look like a typical green city or green economy. But believe me, it is well planned, it is well outlaid, and all efforts are made to create win-win opportunities for business, for the community and the environment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jovšek, for this wonderful presentation. I think the only thing that I can say is congratulations to the Royal Commission of Yambu, because it has been a real example of development, investment. In 40 years, you have done a great creation in this city. It's industrial, it's livable, and I wish all the best to reach the goals that you have in mind. It's excellent also to see that you are integrating one of the 6 principles of the environmental international law, the principle of polluters pay. This is very important. In many places, we don't look at that. We have to extend the responsibilities also, and that's one of the ways. Also, it's highly impressive to see the reuse of water and the future that you are wishing for the region. Congratulations. So we continue with the session in the third presentation with Mr. Jose Antonio Alberich. He will be talking about renewable energy and PV in Saudi Arabia. Please. Dr. Jose Antonio Alvarez is a partner with Kearney and have more than 20 years of experience working in chemicals, oil and gas, and utilities. He has significant experience in manufacturing and industrial maintenance strategy, network design and supply chain, sourcing, trading, and risk management. Please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good morning, everybody. I think that the first thing I'm going to do is to explain why we have to talk about the renewable energies in the green economy. And I think that if I may simplify green economy, I think that is three pillars. One is recycling, second one is waste management and emissions, and the third one is obviously energy mix and energy efficiency. And all the three pillars are totally correlated. So if I'm thinking about zero waste versus recycling, so waste management and recycling are fully integrated. If I think about the energy mix versus emissions, depending on my energy mix, I will emit less or more CO2 to the environment. If I'm thinking about the link between the energy efficiency and the waste to energy is one of the key projects that Royal Commission is thinking about. So all the three pillars are very much interrelated. And why putting this session as part of this panel of international best practices? I think it's also very clear. I think that in the Middle East we have difficulties to talk about renewable energies. It's taking us too long, really. And sometimes I have difficulties when talking about the renewables in the Middle East because it seems like I'm mentioning the enemy. It seems like if we invest in green energy, in the renewable energy, then the oil markets are going to be affected. That is not true. So if you see every projection of oil demand is saying that at least until 2040, at least, the oil demand globally will increase. It's not that it will be decreased. It will continue increasing for the next 20 years over. And after that, we don't know. I mean, we think that there will be a stabilization or decline, but 20 years of oil demand, healthy oil demand is going to continue there. And not only that, we are migrating very quickly to chemicals. So whenever the oil demand starts to plateau, the demand of chemicals will continue boosting. If you see how much is the total market of chemicals, how much it has grown over the last 20 years, it's impressive. So there is no risk at all. Renewable energies are not an enemy at all. They are really an opportunity because we need new materials that come from the chemicals for the renewables and sustainable economies, because we need to be more efficient in the waste management, in the water treatment, and all that is chemicals. So there is no reason to be afraid of renewables, just the opposite. I think it's mandatory. It's not something we can avoid. And by the way, before any oil demand starts to decline or to stabilize, we'll have to tackle much bigger problems in terms of climate change, and the solution is also with the chemicals. So with that introduction, let me make a quiz. Solar panels, that is a ground-mounted facility, utility scale. Think about SCACA, think about REPDO. Turkey was yesterday here talking about ENGIE, but Turkey was, he was previously the head of REPDO. So he's the one that mastered the SCACA tender that I'm going to talk about. Hands up, how many of you think that you will have solar panels in your homes in the next 5 or 10 years? Okay, so like 5% of the audience maximum, okay. Then the second question is, how many of you think that yourselves or your sons and daughters will be driving electric vehicles? Okay, so you will need more in electric vehicles than in solar panels. That's very interesting. Okay, that's a good start. I think that both will come very soon. I bring good news today. I said that renewable energies are mandatory. I have to say more. I think that they are mandatory, but they are cool and trendy. So last weekend it was the Formula E. The electric vehicles are already in the Formula 1. And we had them coming to Riyadh. One of the coolest events you can attend, really. It's one of the most funny and exhilarating events you can see in sports nowadays. I think that is, again, needed. It's really trendy. And it's not a risk to the economy, and it is possible. So we had some of the speeches this morning talking about how technologies are fully available. And exactly the same happens with renewable energies. Technology is not an excuse. It was an excuse or it was a hurdle 12, 15 years ago. What you have on the right of the chart is the tariff, what you are paying today in Saudi Arabia for your electricity. And it's very interesting to see that residential is heavily subsidized. So in any power system in any other place of the world, the consumers that consume more are the ones that get the cheapest prices. In Saudi Arabia, you have it the other way around because it's heavily subsidized. It's not sustainable, really. So industries are paying more than residential, which means that we are making our industry less competitive than in other countries. The good news is that if I take the technology that we have today with solar PV, today, the levelized cost of energy is apples to apples. How much is the total cost to produce, to generate 1 kilowatt over the cycle of the life cycle of the asset? So capex, opex, everything. Okay? So today we can generate electricity with solar PV in Saudi Arabia at around 28 halalas per kilowatt hour. If I compare it with the right chart, which is how much we are paying, well, actually the tariff for government consumption, for commercial high consumption, for residential, for residential that is below the hurdle of the 6,000 kilowatts per month, is already more expensive than what we can do, what we can achieve with solar. So today we have technology that is competitive. We could displace 100% of the government and the high commercial and residential consumption with solar and still making money. Even more. Repdo. Some people criticize Repdo. I'm a big fan of Repdo. I think that they inherited the CACR objectives and they are really deploying renewable technologies in the kingdom at last. If I think about the first tender that Repdo awarded, the SCACA tender, that by the way was commissioned last week or the week before, I think that it started just operations. That tender was closed. It was given to the second cheapest bidder, not even to the cheapest bidder, to the second cheapest bidder. And it was closed at around 9 halalas per kilowatt hour. That is amazing. So that is around $25 per megawatt hour. If you look at the wholesale markets in Europe, the price of the energy, the wholesale price, is around 50, 60. We have hourly prices, okay? But it's like twice the price of the SCACA tender. And that is pure pool wholesale. To that you have to add transmission and distribution costs. So please wake up. I mean, we are talking about the technology that is already 100% more competitive than what the pools of energy mixes are delivering in Europe. No technology excuse, no economic excuse whatsoever. It is possible today. Why it has? Well, it was not possible 12 or 15 years ago. So I landed in Saudi Arabia working for SABIC, and it was more supply chain and logistics, and I started to try to promote solar energy. In 2007, it was not possible. It was the years where in Europe we committed mistakes with the regulation, big ones, because we were giving very high feed-in tariffs, and that distorted completely the markets, and that created the perception of renewable energies being too expensive, not viable, not so clean at all. So what has happened in the last 8 years or the last decade is that what you have in the chart is the utility scale system prices of solar PV. So we were talking about $4,600 per kilowatt. A normal house, your houses are having, let's say, if you have a villa, you have 5-6 kilowatts contracted with SEC. So that means that in 2010, installing solar PV in your houses would cost you an arm and a leg. Simply not possible. People didn't want to pay that. You compared it with the tariff of the SEC. Said, no, look, to pay back this, I need 15 years, 20 years. There was some uncertainty about the durability of the modules, so people were really reluctant. Last year, we were already around $1 per watt. That is what we were talking about 10 years ago when thinking about thin film technology, only the price of the module. And this $1 is the price of the system. And it's going down over and over. So much that the LCOE, the global trend, last year, this US NREL data closed around 6 cents of dollar per kilowatt, but the projection is that it will continue going down by 50%. Again, not needed. Again, SCACA tender was already there and beyond. SCACA tender was $25 per megawatt. That means 2.5 cents of dollar per kilowatt hour. So we are today in Saudi Arabia already at the level that we are forecasting globally in 2030. No excuses. It's economic, it's cool, it's possible. So why this decrease of prices? Why this competitiveness increase of solar? There are two elements. One is technologies, learning curve, scale, and the other one is market dynamics. The market is flooded with modules. We started with this technology in Germany, Spain, the Americas as well, and then suddenly Chinese took over. And they have been able to improve the technology and the manufacturing to a way that was unthinkable 10 years ago. So that they are, if you think about the key suppliers of modules today, are all Chinese. Trina Solar is very present in the region, so they are really good, but you have many others. Some Canadian companies, some survivor from Germany, but the market is oversupplied. So the prices will continue going down, not only because of the technology improvement, but also because of the market dynamics. And also, if I think about, I will talk about localization later, if I think about how to deploy solar energy, solar PV in Saudi Arabia, let me come back to the previous page. Our obsession when national industrial clusters started with this solar cluster 15 years ago, Saleh Al-Akhili, Dr. Ulrich, we were obsessed about localizing modules, localizing the whole chain. We think that today that is not needed. Again, markets overflooded, and also some technology risk. This chart is from the NREL. You see that the orange and the pink liners over there, those are breakthrough technologies. There is a technology, there's a new material called perovskite, that is a mineral that has a structure that is much more. The chart shows the power efficiency, and you can see that the perovskite on the right is the one that is booming up. We don't know when, but it's for sure in the next 5 years it will be more competitive than the polysilicon. So why should I want to invest in polysilicon if there is such a market overflow and the technology uncertainty? It is true that these new technologies take 5 years or 10 years to come. So perovskite is still unstable, etc. But again, another opportunity for us as an industry because perovskite is chemicals. It's a mineral, but you can synthesize it also with organic materials. Why not in the Middle East? You have to help me with this. The market has already reacted globally. So these are the numbers of the total installed capacity of solar PV globally. You see, we will close this year around 440 gigawatts of capacity. The peak demand in Saudi Arabia in the summer is around 65 gigawatts. That means that globally, we are already installing something like 8 times the total capacity of generation of Saudi Arabia. Solar PV is not anymore a residual technology. It's becoming a mainstream technology. And it's competitive. So we have reached grid parity in many countries already. So why is it not happening in Saudi Arabia? We think that it's coming. We think that this is booming. And we think that being today in Jambu is great because what has to happen is that there are some pilots of some proof of concepts, and the Royal Commission could be perfectly a pilot for that, so that there is more awareness, more adoption of the technology, and then it will become mainstream. 3 things that we are working on to make this deployment of solar technologies happening in Saudi Arabia. First of all, there is some need for maturity of the regulatory framework, but ICRA has been working on that already. So there is a net metering regulation that is being implemented, and SEC is fully supporting the deployment of solar PV as well. The second thing that we can do is to expand the business models. We can just copy what we have in other regions, in other countries, and it's very easy. We can go, I will elaborate a little bit more on that, but we can go to sustainable models that integrate solar PV that have been proven in other regions. And the third thing that we can do is to accelerate local content. To mitigate that fear that I was mentioning about, okay, if renewables come, chemicals and oil will go down. No, that is not true. And actually, we are working with SABIC in the Nusanet program. I will show you what we are doing in that regard. On the first one, regulatory, just copy. I mean, you have two models. One is the price-based instruments, and the other one is the quantity-based instruments. Both have been used in other regions, in other countries, depending on the maturity of the markets in solar, but they work. So you can put a feed-in tariff, you can put net metering regulation. Everything is invented in that regard. Just go to ICRA, go to SEC, and deploy what they are working on. The second one, the new business models. This is an interesting one. You can go to new business models in utility scale, which is on the left, so the new grid concepts, and we already deployed in Saudi Arabia smart grids and smart meters. That is not a problem. But you can go beyond, and you can think about changing completely the energy mix and integrating solar PV as part of that utility scale. Or you can go to expansion of the solar PV with new business models. I can install modules in my house, and then I have a free energy for 25 years. Or I can even connect that with my energy battler, which is connected to my iPhone, so that when I'm driving home, I can put on my AC. It doesn't have to be the whole day. And it's connected to my solar panels. I can even charge my electric vehicle. By the way, electric vehicles, I was mentioning e-Formula in Riyadh, but it's coming. So it's coming to the Middle East. It's unstoppable. For the section, the audience on the right section, ladies, you can now drive. Electric vehicles are much cooler than gasoline vehicles. If you have a Tesla, even the cheapest model of Tesla, Tesla 3, if you're in a traffic light, starting in a traffic light, you can win a Lamborghini or a Maserati because the traction is direct. So the acceleration of the electric vehicles is impressive. You can think about that integration as well. You can think about domotics and infotainment in your car. So the whole solar PV is integrated with a much wider business model that is fully available. And we have today companies in Saudi Arabia that have the technology, local companies. We're meeting this evening in Jeddah, an investor for Nusanet that is working on these technologies. We have another investor of the Nusanet program in Riyadh, who is really top-notch technology in terms of software integration of renewables. So technology is available, companies are coming. I'm going to skip this, it's just to emphasize where to invest. The modules are around 30%, 35% of the total cost of the system prices and the LCOE. I don't need to invest in modules. I don't need to put intensive energy industries to produce polysilicon here. I can monetize 65% of the total value chain margin, and I can do it overnight. It's not complicated. It's more employment creation. It's about installations, technical design, maintenance, and generation of electricity. What are we doing with SABIC? You know, SABIC launched 2 years ago a local content program called Nusanet. And what we have done this year, we were really satisfied with the results of last year. So we said we have to do more. So let's, because we had like random investors. Right now, Tomas, correct me, I think that we have around 900 investors in the pipeline of Nusanet. 60 of them already graduated. So they have signed investment opportunities that are breaking ground as we speak. But we thought we had to do more. And that more is what we call the accelerators. The accelerators is retaking the whole idea of the clusters and using the Nusanet program to accelerate certain sectors. And we are doing that with solar PV. We took the solar value chain and we analyzed what investors we have today in the pipeline of Nusanet that are working on that chain. And we said, we have a very nice population of investors. We saw that we had a gap in the design, installation, and grid connection, and that's where we are reaching out to some companies that in Saudi Arabia are doing that already to fill those gaps and to have a full integrated supply chain and value chain of solar PV in the kingdom. I'm coming back one page. Nusanet is giving full support to these investors so that they can, it's an end-to-end, one-stop shop investment house where any type of and size of investor can go and get support from Nusanet. We are creating the community, the ecosystem that will connect the investors so that if one investor has a technology or an idea in one of the stages of the chain, we can connect them with the rest of the players in the value chain. And then we have launched specifically for solar PV this solar acceleration Nusanet program, where we are putting together all the investors in solar. May I ask you the two questions that I asked before? So how many of you see solar panels in your houses in the next 5 years after what I told you? Okay, well, we improved, yeah. We improved significantly. And I was trying to bring a video of the electric vehicles. I was not able to, but how many of you are thinking about electric vehicles after my speech? Okay, also improved. Okay, thank you. Feel better. Please reach out. Reach out to Nusanet. We are there, working with them, with Fuad Musa, with Faisal Adas. You can go to the portal if you have any idea and register your idea, and they will come back to you with full support for the investment. And also, once again, technology is not a hurdle. I put my timer. We as IT Kearney have a think tank called Energy Transition Institute with free download information. Reach out to us. We are participating in forums, in projects on this topic in the Middle East. We are quite eager to see this happening. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jose Luis, for this excellent presentation. He has just demonstrated that Saudi Arabia has been a leader in oil and gas and could also be a leader in renewables with all this technology that we have available today. We are going to open the session for the questions. We have 5 minutes before the prayer time. So please make your question and make a little introduction of yourself before saying the question you have. Thank you.
Questions?
The microphone, please. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. Ahmed Al-Hamadi from Technical Affairs Division. I just would like to ask you about what are the bottleneck issues for implementing solar energy in Saudi Arabia, and how do you see we could improve that? Thank you.
I think that right now there are no bottlenecks. There were in the past because of multiple reasons. First, the regulation was not in place. Now we have the regulation in place. It is true that it's taken it long to implement the net metering. Net metering is you can produce or you can buy from the grid. We have a regulation for that already. There is not feed-in tariff, so they are not going to pay you as we did in Europe for feeding into the grid a different price. Maybe we have to work on that, but it's, as said, it's not needed because today you can generate much cheaper than what you get from SEC. So there is no need for a feed-in tariff, which in the end is a subsidy, because you can be more competitive generating. All the protocols of integrating the capacities to the grid, yes, I mean, we are not so used to it because we are still in the stage of utility scale ground mounted, but regulation is there and technology and cost efficiency is there.
What about the awareness of people and the infrastructure here?
What about?
The awareness of people.
That is the big problem. And we solve this as soon as a solar company starts sponsoring Al Hilal or Al Nasser or the team in Jammu. I don't know which is the team in Jammu. My apologies. I'm more in Riyadh than in here. But the day that we have some solar company with the Al Nasser T-shirt, that will change. Or with through the E-formula or things like that. It's pure awareness. And also, I think that there is another linkage which is to be used, which is technology. Everybody, the young generation, they are spending 5-6 hours a day in here. If we can link solar and efficiency and renewables and green economy with the gadgets, then we'll have the awareness.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Another question? Please.
My question is to Alexander. My name is Adnan Aloni. I heard, this is the first time I heard one of our cities, you compare it as benchmark. I'm trying to find a benchmark for the City of Royal Commission. But I heard the very nice word that those cities is cities and state. Could you elaborate what you mean exactly by that?
I was referring to the function. So when I was born in Germany, lived in Australia, so these are the two that I can compare with. Let me use the example of Germany. You have a federal government, then you have a state government, and then you have got a city government. And all of these have different functions. And normally when you have a city government, they need to import environmental laws and everything else from the state. Here is a combination of a state and a city, because we have, for example, environmental regulations that are really setting the scene for the little state of RC Yambu. Does that explain it?
Okay. Another question, please. The last question, because we are out of time.
Malal Ahmadi from Ministry of Economy and Planning. Quick question, honestly. It's for the solar system, and we saw how the costs for the solar, mostly on maintenance, right? Operation and maintenance. Curious, what are these components of these maintenance elements? And is dust and winds and dust blasts and those things taken into account in these elements, and how to deal with them?
Sure. I can share with you the whole LCOE model, but if the question is around if is it more expensive than in other regions?
No, like just in the, like we saw how the breakdown,
Yeah.
it's mostly on the operation and maintenance, right?
Yes.
So just like to elaborate a bit on that, like
Yes.
what is it, are the elements?
Yep.
And if it's taken into account the maintenance of the results of, dusts and,
It is taking
Yeah.
it into account. So
Yes.
It is. So what happens is that we are migrating from static modules to bifacial modules that have some mechanical elements to orientate the solar panels, and that is increasing the operations and maintenance cost. You have also some element of cleaning the panels, obviously. My caveat is, it is not true that it's more complicated in Saudi Arabia because of the sand and so on. That is not true. It's not proven. There was a long discussion years ago. You have to clean the panels in every country, so that is not a big difference. But it includes all those elements. There are also some elements of the installation that include all the structures. As you go from ground-mounted to roof-mounted, obviously all the metal structures that you have to put in place are more expensive, but it's all included in there. The interesting part of that chart is that the panels have become irrelevant. So the cost of the panel itself, that was the big problem years ago, is not such an important anymore. It's really more the installation, the technical design, the operations and maintenance, which is all what we can localize tomorrow here. That's why I say there's no limit. There's no problem with the producing policy going here. Just let's go big time to localizing, because 65% of the value chain can be localized tomorrow.
Thank you very much. Very interesting and practical question. So I just would like to thank the panelists for participating in this session, and thank you very much for attending this conference today.
Thank you, Martiza. Thank you for your panelists, and we will be continuing, but we'll have a break. But before that, we have an announcement by Mr. Ghazi.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Let me just start by Arabic. أعتذر عن بس المداخلة هذه مو موجودة في الأجندة اليوم في جدول الأعمال. حقيقة القادة أحيانا وفي الغالب يتلمسون بعض النقاط الذي يشعرون بها لمجهود فرق العمل التي تتم في إعداد وتنظيم المؤتمرات. وبهذه المناسبة حقيقة شرفني أن أقدم رغبة سعادة الرئيس التنفيذي للهيئة الملكية بينبع المهندس عدنان بن عايش العلوني لتكريم رئيس المؤتمر سعادة المهندس علي الفهيدي، نظير الجهود الكبيرة التي قام بها في الإعداد والتنظيم والتحضير طوال الأشهر والأسابيع والأيام الماضية. فاسمحوا لي أدعو سعادة الرئيس التنفيذي للصعود إلى المسرح، ومن ثم كذلك أدعو سعادة المهندس علي الفهيدي نيابة عن جميع الزملاء في فرق العمل لهذا المهرجان.
As a token of appreciation by His Excellency Executive Director of the Royal Commission of Yambo for the efforts that have been exerted by Engineer Ali Al-Fahedi, the chairman of the conference, and his colleague to bring this event into the light and all the activities that took place before the beginning of the conference. His Excellency Engineer Adnan Al-Alwani, the Executive Director, is honoring Engineer Ali Al-Fahedi for his effort as the chairman of the conference. Thank you all very much. We'll take a break now and we shall be back at 12:30 for the next session and the last session for the day. Thank you all very much.